Hi and welcome to Menstrual Cups and Cloth Pads Kenya. So today I'm going to be talking about whether or not you can use an IUD, a menstrual cup, when you have an IUD in. I have had an IUD for 2 years and I've been using a menstrual cup for, I'm not sure, maybe about half of that time. And I haven't had any problems to date. When I was looking into using a menstrual cup and when I was doing my research, I saw that there's a lot of debate online about whether it's actually safe. And a lot of people are concerned about whether or not you can actually pull out your IUD. So of course, at the time I was like, oh, is this a thing? Like, is that really possible? And I spoke to my gynecologist about it and she said, actually, it can happen. It's improbable, but it is still a possibility. Although in the amount of time that however many years she's been a doctor, she says she's seen that situation happen twice, I think it was. So it's really not something that's very likely to happen, but there is still that possibility that it can happen. The one thing I did see when I was researching was that people, and I basically Googled removing your menstrual cup yourself, and I saw stories of women who are removing their IUDs themselves at home. I mean, I was like, is this safe? Honestly, I don't know. It's a bit extreme, but I guess do you. Now, I had tried to use a cup prior to my IUD being put in and I was not successful that time. It was leaking horribly and I just couldn't figure out how to do it. So the second time around when I went to use it, I did some research about sort of troubleshooting tips, and one of them was locate your cervix. So when I went to look at my cervix, I realized that actually if I just followed the strings, I could find my cervix, and that's how I found my cervix. So when I was using my cup, especially in the beginning, I could feel my IUD strings, but they weren't long, so I wasn't overly concerned about them. But I would suggest that if you do have an IUD in and you want to use a cup, it may be a good idea to ask your doctor about how long your strings are and if they can trim them. Because I imagine that if you are like, you've got your strings dangling down there, it may be that you can pinch them when you're trying to remove the cup and pull them out accidentally. So that's definitely a concern. I would say just speak to your doctor about that. My strings were really short, so I could feel them kind of there, but they weren't like hanging. I would be very careful, however, when I was doing my insertion, because first of all, I would always kind of do this finger around the rim to make sure that my cervix was not sitting on the outside and it was actually sitting on the inside. And I would be careful that when I was doing that I wouldn't accidentally dislodge or yank anything at the same time. And I think that's probably a bigger concern if your strings are a bit longer. So something to think about. Now, another thing I see being mentioned online, and I actually don't know how likely this one is, if I'm entirely honest. However, because it's something that people bring up, I'll just discuss it here as well, and that's suction of the cups. Now, this is a cup that I really like to use. It's my favorite cup. It's the Ruby cup. It's quite a soft cup. I don't think it has a particularly strong suction, but I'm still very careful when I'm removing my cup to just make sure that I break the seal by sort of pressing at the bottom. I know some people can kind of press on the side there as well, and that just breaks the suction that's created by the seal. Now, I think if you have a cup which has a stronger suction, and I know that there are some out there, then maybe this is more of a concern for you. Again, I don't know how likely this is, but I know, like, for example, the Femicycle, it has that lip. And I've read stories of people who say the suction is so strong when you're trying to remove it, even when you've broken the seal, that, sometimes it can leave your cervix a bit misshapen or something like that, or leave a dent in your cervix or something like that along those lines. I don't remember exactly. But if you are concerned, then I would say make sure that you're breaking that seal. I mean, first of all, it must just be agony for you to try and get it out. But I imagine if you have maybe a high cervix and you have to sort of wiggle it a little bit lower before you're able to get a firm grasp, that would be a much more likely scenario. I think actually the final thing for me would just be noting your cervix height. So I think if you have a lower cervix, the strings are just that much more accessible to you. If you have a very high cervix, there's some people who can't even touch their cervix with their fingers. And, then you have shorter strings as well. It's not really going to be that much of an issue. But if you have a low cervix and, like some people only have like one, what do you call it? Whatever you call it, then you would find that your cervix is so low that I suppose the probability of you getting hold of the strings is a little bit higher. So somebody like me, I have a low cervix, so I'm always really careful with my strings. Okay, I'm talking about that in the present tense. I have now had my IUD removed, and actually towards the end I couldn't feel my strings, so they had actually ridden all the way up and they were gone. I couldn't feel them, but if I could still feel them, I would always be, and when I could still feel them, I was always very careful about how I would use the cup when I was inserting it or when I was removing it. Personally, I think you can use the cup when you have the IUD. I think there's loads of women who successfully do with no problems. I think you just have to be a little bit more careful and more aware of what you're doing than if you don't have one. But definitely speak to your gynecologist. The only caveat for that is that alternative menstrual products are maybe not as mainstream as most of us in the community would like them to be. And so you may have the scenario where your gynecologist either hasn't heard about them or only has a negative impression of them. I actually met a gynecologist in a social setting who was like, oh, they're super unhygienic and unsanitary, and was just really against the use of menstrual cup and reusable menstrual products in general. So that's just one of the things to consider when you're speaking to your gynecologist, that they may not have heard about them, they may not be an advocate for them, but they may also be open to learning. So yeah, something to bear in mind. Thank you for watching.